Welcome back, everyone. I am Dr. Bonechill, and this is Dr. Bonechill, your home for the most unsettling true scary stories. Tonight, we venture into one of the most fundamentally disturbing territories of the unexplained, the void left behind, by those who simply vanish. We're exploring tales where the line between the known world and some other, perhaps far more sinister, reality seems to blur, leaving only questions and a chilling sense of absence. Our theme for this evening is 3 true scary, mysterious disappearance horror stories. These aren't tales of simple accidents or expected departures. These are accounts where the ordinary fabric of life tears open, and individuals are consumed by a mystery that offers no solace, no answers. Imagine a seasoned hiker, swallowed by a familiar trail, leaving behind only an unsettling silence and a strange, beckoning melody. Picture a child, present one moment and gone the next, from the supposed safety of her own backyard, with only a cryptic message whispered through the static. And consider a remote, uninhabited island that seems to listen, and a researcher who broadcasts one final, terrifying message before joining the pervasive silence. These narratives remind us that sometimes people don't just get lost. Sometimes it feels as though they are deliberately taken, erased by forces we can neither comprehend nor confront. Before we delve into these experiences, if you appreciate these narratives of the unexplained, please take a moment to show your support by hitting that like button. If you're new to our community, consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you don't miss our ventures into the unknown. Sharing this video with fellow enthusiasts of true horror also helps immensely. And as always, I'd love to know where you're joining us from tonight. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you. Now I invite you to settle in, perhaps lower the lights, and prepare for the experiences that await. Story 1. The Piper of Whisper Creek. Trail, my name is Sarah. I'm 34 now, working as an ecological consultant, mainly desk-based, but this happened 8 years ago, back in the autumn of 2016. I was a park ranger then, stationed at Blackwood National Park, a vast expanse of old-growth forest, rugged peaks, and a network of trails that could take you deep into true wilderness. It was beautiful, often challenging, but mostly it felt knowable. Until the disappearance of Mark Henderson. Blackwood Park was no stranger to missing persons cases. It came with the territory. Most were hikers who'd wandered off trail, underestimated the terrain, or weren't prepared for sudden weather shifts. We usually found them, sometimes worse for wear, but found nonetheless. Mark Henderson's case was different from the outset. He was an experienced hiker in his late 40s, meticulous in his planning and well-equipped. He'd signed in at the ranger station, outlining his intended route. A 3-day loop that included Whisper Creek Trail, a moderately difficult path known for its stunning gorge views, but also for its sections where the forest pressed in close, and the rest of the world felt miles away. Cell service was notoriously patchy out there, non-existent in many parts of the deeper woods. Mark was reported overdue by his wife when he failed to check in after his planned return date. The weather had been clear for the duration of his hike. Cool, crisp autumn days, perfect for trekking. We initiated a standard search and rescue operation. For the first 2 days, we found nothing. No sign of him along his intended route. No broken branches, no dropped gear. It was as if he'd just evaporated from the trail. The 3rd day, one of the volunteer search teams found his backpack. That's when the first knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It wasn't thrown aside or ripped as if by an animal or a fall. It was placed neatly, almost deliberately, beside a large moss-covered boulder about 100 feet off Whisper Creek Trail, in a small, sun-dappled clearing. All his gear was inside: his sleeping bag, his tent, his emergency rations, his first aid kit. Everything except his primary water bottle and his compass. His map was there, still folded neatly. There were no signs of a struggle, no scuff marks in the dirt, nothing to indicate a sudden departure or distress. It was just sitting there, Our initial theory, the one we clung to, was that he'd set his pack down to take a short detour, maybe answer nature's call or investigate a sound, planning to come right back, and had somehow gotten disoriented, even without his compass. But it felt thin, even then. Why leave the map but take the compass for such a short deviation? Why leave everything else? The dog teams were brought in. They picked up Mark's scent strongly around the backpack, but then, about 20 feet beyond it, heading deeper into the woods and away from the trail, the scent just stopped. Abruptly, as if he'd been lifted into the air. The dogs whined, confused, circling the spot before giving up, noses to the ground in futile sniffs. That evening, back at the temporary command post we'd set up at a trailhead, one of the older volunteers, a local named Jed, who'd been part of searches in these woods for decades, mentioned something odd. He'd been part of the team sweeping the area near where the backpack was found. Late the previous afternoon, as dusk was setting in and they were about to head back, he'd heard something. Faint, he said, almost missed it. Whistling. A simple melodic tune, almost like a folk song. He'd assumed it was another searcher, maybe someone from a different team. Though they were supposed to maintain radio silence unless it was an emergency, he called out, got no response, and the whistling faded away. He'd shrugged it off, but now with the dogs finding nothing, he wasn't so sure. I remember feeling a prickle on my skin when he said that. The woods at dusk can play tricks on your ears, but Jed wasn't the fanciful type. The next day, I was assigned to a solo grid search in the area beyond where the scent was lost. The forest there was dense, ancient trees draped in moss, the ground thick with centuries of fallen, needles that muffled every footstep. It felt watchful. I'd been a ranger for 5 years by then, comfortable in the wilderness, but this particular stretch of woods had an atmosphere that was heavier, somehow more primal. About half a mile from the scent loss point, I found the carving. It was on an old lightning-scarred hemlock etched deep into the bark. It wasn't a name or initials or any kind of trail marker I recognized. It was a spiral, a single continuous line coiling inwards, about the size of my hand. It looked fresh, the exposed wood lighter than the surrounding bark. It wasn't animal damage, the lines were too precise, too deliberate. I took photos, noted the location, but a cold dread was starting to seep into me. It felt like a symbol, but of what? The weather took a turn that afternoon. A cold, driving rain swept in, reducing visibility and making the search conditions miserable. It also meant any subtle tracks or signs would be washed away. The search continued for another 3 days, hampered by the bad weather, the oppressive atmosphere growing with each fruitless hour. One evening, I was alone in my small cabin at the main ranger station, poring over maps trying to see some pattern, some possibility we'd missed. It was late, the rain still drumming on the roof. I heard a distinct snap from just outside my window, like a dry twig breaking underfoot. I froze, listening. The station was remote, and while wildlife was common, this sounded close. I peered through the curtain but saw only the rain-lashed darkness. Probably just a deer, I told myself, or the building settling. But when I opened my door the next morning, a small, perfectly smooth gray river stone sat on my doormat. It wasn't from anywhere near the station. Our local rock was mostly granite and shale. This was the kind of stone you'd find in Whisper Creek itself, miles away. It was cold to the touch. The most chilling incident, however, came via radio. Another search team, Rangers Mike and Dave, were deep in a particularly rugged sector known as Devil's Gulch, a place even the most seasoned hikers usually avoided. Their voices came over the radio, frantic, broken by static. Can't explain, we saw him, Henderson, walking into that thicket, dense like a wall. No, he didn't look back. Mike, tell them. Then Dave's voice, even more strained. It wasn't right. He just walked into it, like it opened for him. We called. He didn't turn. Then he was gone. We couldn't follow. A feeling. An awful feeling, like we were being warned off. Then, just static. We eventually re-established contact. They were shaken, insisting they'd seen Mark Henderson alive. walked directly into an impossibly dense wall of rhododendrons and mountain laurel where, by their estimation, not even a rabbit could have passed. They said he hadn't acknowledged their calls, just walked calmly and disappeared into the foliage. They admitted they'd been overcome by a sudden, paralyzing wave of dread that rooted them to the spot for several minutes, preventing any immediate pursuit. Their story was largely dismissed by the higher-ups as a product of stress, exhaustion, and the suggestive power of the ongoing search. But I knew Mike and Dave. They were solid, experienced. They wouldn't invent something like that. We searched the thicket they described. It was as impenetrable as they'd said. No broken branches, no sign anyone had passed through. The official search was scaled back a few days later, then eventually called off. Mark Henderson was classified as lost, presumed deceased due to exposure. His family held a memorial, but I couldn't let it go. A week after the search ended, I went back to Whisper Creek Trail alone off duty. I told myself I just wanted one last look around, that maybe fresh eyes would see something we'd missed. I parked at the trailhead and hiked in. The woods were quiet, the autumn air crisp. When I reached the clearing where Mark's backpack had been found, the place felt different, colder. The silence was profound, unnervingly so. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels, and then I heard it. Stillness. The whistling. Faint at first, then clearer. A simple, haunting melody, the same one Jed had described. It seemed to come from the trees around me, from the air itself, from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't menacing, not exactly, but it was profoundly unsettling. It curled into my ears, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I looked around wildly, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Is anyone there? Mark?" Only the whistling answered, seeming to grow a fraction louder, a fraction closer. My gaze fell to the ground near the boulder, and I saw it. Etched into the damp earth, a fresh spiral, identical to the one on the hemlock tree. It hadn't been there during the search. I would have seen it. As I stared at that spiral, the whistling intensified, and a wave of intense dizziness washed over me. The trees around the clearing seemed to sway, their edges blurring. The path ahead, leading deeper into the woods from where the scent had vanished, looked distorted, shimmering slightly, almost beckoning. I felt a sudden, overwhelming compulsion to walk towards it, to follow the whistling into the dark trees. It was a strangely peaceful feeling, a surrender. Something, some primal instinct for self-preservation screamed in the back of my mind. I stumbled backwards, away from the spiral, away from the beckoning path. The urge to go forward was strong, like a physical pull, but the fear was stronger. I turned and fled, not even daring to look back, half running, half stumbling along the trail until I reached my vehicle. Mark Henderson was never found. No trace of him ever surfaced. The official explanation remains on file, but I know that's not what happened. I requested a transfer shortly after that. I work in an office, now analyzing data. I don't go into deep woods alone anymore. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, or in the quiet of the early morning, I think I can hear a faint, melodic whistling. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that some places and some things are best left undisturbed. Whatever called to Mark Henderson on Whisper Creek Trail, whatever carved those spirals, it's still out there, and it's still waiting. Story 2. The Girl in the Yellow Dress. My name is David. This happened 5 years ago on a warm Saturday in late July. It's taken me this long to even be able to talk about it in a coherent way, without completely breaking down. Our daughter Lily. She would have been 11 this year. We were having a family barbecue in our backyard. My brother Tom and his family were over. Our house was in a typical suburban neighborhood. Decent-sized yards, mostly fenced. Lots of kids. Ours was fully fenced, a 6-foot wooden privacy fence. The gate was always latched because Lily was only 6 at the time, and our younger son Sam was just a toddler. It felt safe. It was safe. Or so we thought. It was a perfect summer afternoon. Burgers sizzling on the grill, Music playing softly, the kids laughing and running around. Lily was wearing her favorite bright yellow sundress. I can still see it so clearly. She was on the tire swing we'd hung from the big oak tree at the back of the yard, her laughter carrying over the general hum of conversation. I remember looking over at her, smiling, then turning back to the grill to flip the burgers and chat with Tom. It couldn't have been more than a minute. 60 seconds, maybe 90 at most. When I looked back, Lily wasn't on the swing. It was still swaying gently, empty. My first thought was that she'd run off to join her cousins, who were playing tag near the patio, or maybe she'd gone inside to get a drink. "Lilybug," I called out, expecting her to pop her head up from somewhere. No answer. After another minute, a tiny flicker of unease started. I asked my wife, Karen, if she'd seen Lily. She was talking with Tom's wife, and shook her head, a little frown appearing. "She was just on the swing a second ago," she said. We both called her name, louder this time. The other kids stopped their game, looking around. Sam was on the blanket with Karen, babbling happily, oblivious. A quick search of the small yard, then the house. Nothing. The casual calls became more urgent. "Lily! Lily, where are you?" The gate to the backyard was still closed, the latch firmly in place. There was no way she could have opened it herself, not that easily. And the fence. It was too high for a 6-year-old to climb quickly or without help. Panic started to coil in my chest, cold and tight. One of Lily's cousins, Mia, who was 8 at the time, came over looking worried. "Uncle David," she said. "Lily was talking to someone by the big tree, just before." "Talking to who?" "Sweetie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Mia frowned. "I don't know. I didn't see. She said it was a new friend." A new friend. All the adults were on the patio or near the grill. All the other kids were accounted for. My blood ran cold. Within 15 minutes, we were frantic. We'd searched every inch of our property. Our neighbors were starting to look over their fences, alerted by our increasingly desperate calls. By the time dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows from that damned oak tree, we'd called the police. The hours that followed are a blur of flashing lights, uniformed officers, concerned neighbors fanning out with flashlights, and a deepening, soul-crushing dread. The police were thorough, professional. They questioned everyone, they searched. But Lily was just gone. Vanished from a fenced, secure backyard in broad daylight, surrounded by family. The only thing out of place, the only tangible anomaly in that nightmare, was found by one of the officers. Tucked almost out of sight, among the gnarled roots at the base of the oak tree was a small, crude doll. It was made of twigs bound together with twine, and wrapped around its middle was a tiny scrap of bright yellow fabric. My heart stopped. It was the exact same material, the same color as Lily's sundress. The scrap looked like it had been torn, but neatly. None of us had ever seen that doll before. It wasn't one of Lily's toys. It wasn't anything any of us recognized. Later that night, a neighbor from 2 streets over, someone we barely knew, came forward. She said her dog, an old, usually quiet beagle, had started barking uncontrollably around the time Lily must have disappeared. Not at anyone in the street, she said, but at the sky. Just barking straight up at the sky, frantic and agitated. She thought it was odd, brought the dog inside, and didn't think much more of it until she heard about Lily. It was probably nothing, a coincidence. But in the vortex of fear and confusion, every strange detail felt like a potential clue, or a harbinger of something incomprehensible. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. I sat on the back porch as the awful night wore on, staring at that empty tire swing, which creaked faintly in the breeze. And then I heard it. A giggle. A light, airy, childlike giggle, Lily's giggle. It sounded like it was coming from the oak tree, but high up, as if it were in the highest branches or even carried on the wind from above them. I scrambled up, shouting her name, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran to the tree, shone, my flashlight up into the leaves. Nothing. Just the rustling leaves and the empty, mocking swing. Karen heard it too, or thought she did. We clung to each other, teetering on the edge of madness. The official investigation went on for weeks, then months. Amber alerts, news reports, search parties combing the nearby woods and waterways. No trace. No witnesses beyond Mia's vague comment about a new friend, no ransom demands. Nothing. It was as if the earth or the air had just swallowed our little girl. The little twig doll was examined. No fingerprints, no identifiable fibers other than those from Lily's dress. The fabric, they said, had been torn, not cut. The police explored every avenue. Abduction by a stranger was the prevailing theory, of course, but how? Over a high fence in minutes without anyone seeing or hearing anything? It seemed impossible. Yet, she was gone. Weeks turned into months. The initial desperate hope eroded into a dull, constant ache of grief and bewilderment. Lily's room remained untouched, a shrine of unbearable sadness. One afternoon, maybe 6 weeks after she disappeared, I was sitting in her room holding her favorite stuffed rabbit, just trying to feel close to her. My eyes fell on her old baby monitor. We hadn't used it in ages, but we'd sometimes used the handset as a sort of intercom if she was in her room and we were downstairs. It was sitting on her nightstand, slightly askew. I don't know why I did it. A desperate, irrational impulse. I picked up the parent unit from its charger in our bedroom and switched it on. The receiver in Lily's room was also, by some chance, still on, though we never left it that way. Static. That's all I expected. Just the hiss of an open channel. And then, through the static, I heard it. A voice. Lily's voice. It was faint, whispery, but unmistakably her. She wasn't crying. She didn't sound scared. She sounded distant and happy. "Daddy?" she said, her sweet voice cutting through the static like an angel's whisper. "It's so pretty here." A little pause, then. "The new friend says I can swing as high as the stars now." My breath hitched. My entire body went cold. Before I could even think to speak, to press the talk button, the voice was gone, replaced by a different sound. A low, almost subaudible hum, like wind rushing through a vast empty chasm, or the thrum of some immense unseen machinery. It lasted only a few seconds, then the monitor cut out completely with a sharp crackle and went dead. I tried for hours to get it working again, changing batteries, checking plugs. Nothing. Both units were fried, I told Karen, I told the police. They listened, patiently, sympathetically. They even had the monitor examined by their technical guys. They found nothing. No explanation for how it could have broadcast anything, let alone a voice, especially since it had been off. They put it down to auditory hallucination, a grief-stricken father's mind playing cruel tricks. But I know what I heard. It was my Lily, and that hum. That hum was not of this world. Lily was never found. The case is cold, filed away under unexplained disappearance. We eventually sold the house. We couldn't live there anymore, not with the constant, silent accusation of that oak tree, that empty space where our daughter used to be. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is blowing, I still think I hear her giggle, and I look up at the stars and I wonder where she is, swinging, the new friend. What was it? Who was it? The questions are a permanent fixture in my mind, a constant, agonizing reminder of the day the world revealed it had teeth and an appetite for the innocent. The ordinary, the everyday, it's all just a thin veneer, and sometimes that veneer rips. Story 3. The Island's Frequency. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm a field biologist, or at least I was. I specialize in island ecosystems, the unique evolutionary paths life takes in extreme isolation. About 3 years ago, in the summer of 2021, I was part of a small research expedition to a place designated Site U7, an uninhabited volcanic island in a remote stretch of the Pacific, hundreds of miles from the nearest shipping lanes or populated landmass. It was a biologist's dream, a theoretically pristine environment, virtually unstudied. The expedition consisted of myself, Dr. Lena Hansen, a botanist, and Ben Carter, a geologist. We were scheduled for a 6-week survey, dropped off by a chartered vessel that would return for us at a prearranged date. The first 2 weeks were incredible. We established a small base camp near a freshwater spring, complete with a powerful radio for daily check-ins with our mainland support, and for emergencies. The island was stunning. Lush, verdant slopes rising to a dormant volcanic peak, black sand beaches, unique flora and fauna we were meticulously cataloging. But it was also quiet, eerily so. The usual chorus of insects you'd expect in such a tropical environment was subdued. Bird song was infrequent. At night, the silence was profound, broken only by the surf or the wind. It wasn't a threatening quiet, not initially, but it was noticeable. A heavy, watchful stillness. The inciting incident, the first domino to fall, involved Ben. He was an experienced geologist, methodical and cautious. On the morning of our 15th day, he set off alone to map some coastal rock formations about 3 miles north of our camp. He had a handheld radio, and we'd agreed on a check-in at noon and his return by 4 p.m., well before dusk. Noon came and went. No call from Ben. We weren't overly concerned at first. Handheld radio batteries die. Signals can be tricky in rugged terrain. He might have just gotten engrossed in his work. But when 4 p.m. passed and then 5 p.m. with no sign of him, a knot of anxiety began to tighten. As dusk started to gather, Lena and I set off along the coast towards the area he'd intended to survey, calling his name, our voices sounding small, against the vastness of the ocean and the looming jungle. Nothing. We found his gear at the base of a sheer cliff face, a place he'd marked on his map as being of particular interest. His geological hammer, his sample bags, his notebook, all neatly placed on a flat rock, as if he'd set them down for a moment and intended to come right back. His handheld radio was there too, switched off. There was no sign of a fall, no scuffed earth, no disturbed vegetation to indicate a struggle or an accident. Just his neatly arranged tools and silence. The next morning we began a systematic search. The island wasn't huge, perhaps 10 square miles in total, but much of it was incredibly rugged, choked with dense jungle and cut by deep ravines. As we searched, Lena made a disturbing discovery. In a small clearing, not far from where Ben's gear was found, were 3 perfectly circular patches in the undergrowth. Each was about 6 feet in diameter. Inside these circles, all the vegetation, grass, ferns, small shrubs, was dead, desiccated, and gray, as if flash-frozen or exposed to intense radiation. But there was no charring, no smell of burning. The soil within the circles was cold to the touch, strikingly so despite the hot tropical sun beating down. The ground outside the circles was warm, teeming with life. We'd never seen anything like it. Days passed. We widened our search, calling Ben's name until our throats were raw. Nothing. We used the main camp radio to send an emergency message to the mainland, reporting Ben missing and requesting an early extraction. The dispatcher sounded grave. The earliest the supply ship could be diverted and reach us, given our extreme remoteness, was 3 days. 3 more days on that increasingly unsettling island. The nights became the worst. The silence of the island no longer felt passive. It felt charged, attentive. Lena started complaining of a persistent low-frequency hum that she said vibrated in her bones. I couldn't hear it, which only increased her distress. She became jumpy, sleep-deprived, claiming to see fleeting pale lights flickering at the edge of the jungle tree line, just beyond the reach of our lanterns. It was the night before our scheduled rescue, our last night on Site U7. I was manning the main radio, cycling through frequencies, hoping for an update from the approaching ship. Anything to break the oppressive tension. Most channels were just static, the usual hiss of an empty band in such isolation. Then I landed on one frequency that was usually silent, and I heard it. A pulse. A slow, rhythmic, incredibly deep pulse. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Like a colossal heartbeat. or some unimaginably large engine turning over slowly. It wasn't Morse code, not any signal I could identify. It was just this profound, resonant beat, making the fillings in my teeth ache. I tried to trace it, but it seemed to have no specific origin. Lena had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep in her tent. I sat there listening to that impossible pulse, a cold dread creeping up my spine. What was making that sound? Was Ben out there somewhere hearing this too? Suddenly, Lena screamed from her tent. I bolted upright, my heart leaping into my throat. She stumbled out, eyes wide with terror, pointing towards the radio. "Eris, it's Ben. He's on the radio. I heard him." I lunged for the receiver. The rhythmic pulse was gone, replaced by a broken, heavily distorted voice struggling through layers of static. It was undeniably Ben's voice, but strained, thin, almost ethereal. "So quiet here," the voice rasped. "They showed me the patterns, all connected." Static crackled then. "It's not empty. The island. It's listening." Then the voice changed, or rather, something else joined it. That deep, resonant hum, the same one Lena had been describing, now audible even to me, overlaid with Ben's distorted words. "Have to join. The frequency. It's so beautiful. When you understand." At that exact moment, every piece of electronic equipment in our camp died simultaneously. The lanterns flickered and went out. My digital watch went blank. The radio emitted one final ear-splitting shriek of static that sounded almost like a word, or a name, then fell utterly silent. We were plunged into near-total darkness, save for the distant, indifferent stars. Lena let out a choked gasp, her hand clamping onto my arm like a vice, her fingernails digging into my skin. She was pointing towards the tree line at the edge of our small clearing. Standing there, just at the boundary between the beach and the dense blackness of the jungle, was a figure. It was man-shaped, tall and slender, but its outlines were indistinct, wavering slightly, as if seen through heat haze, though the night air was cool. We couldn't make out any features in the dim starlight, only its silhouette against the deeper black of the trees. It stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, just watching us. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised one arm, the gesture unmistakably a beckoning. Lena whimpered. I was frozen, a primal terror locking my muscles. The figure held the gesture for a moment longer. Then, just as slowly, it seemed to recede, or dissolve, back into the impenetrable darkness of the jungle. It didn't walk away, it just wasn't there anymore. We didn't speak. We didn't dare move for several minutes. Then, fumbling in the dark, we found our emergency flare gun. We retreated to the relative perceived safety of our largest tent, zipped it tight and sat there, backs pressed together, flare gun clutched in my trembling hands until the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. The rescue ship arrived on schedule. We told our story, the strange circles, the radio pulse, Ben's voice, the figure. They listened, of course, but without Ben, without any functioning equipment to corroborate the broadcast, without any physical evidence beyond our terrified testimonies, it was just a wild, unsubstantiated tale. An extensive air and sea search was conducted for Ben. Nothing. Not a trace. The island was later declared a prohibited zone for any future research, citing unexplained environmental hazards and personnel disappearance. I never returned to active field research. The scientific part of my brain tries to rationalize what happened. Shared delusion, auditory pareidolia, the effects of extreme stress and isolation. But the part of me that stood on that beach, that heard Ben's voice carried on an impossible current, that saw that figure beckoning from the darkness, that part knows what it experienced. Lena rarely speaks of it. The official report mentions she suffered acute psychological distress. I think she remembers it all but chooses silence. I often wonder about Ben's last words. It's not empty. It's listening. What did he mean? What patterns did he see? And what frequency did he join? Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, I think I can almost hear that low, resonant hum just at the edge of my perception, a reminder of an ancient, watchful consciousness, dwelling in the isolated corners of the world, occasionally reaching out, and sometimes taking what it finds. The silence left by a disappearance is a heavy one, filled with unanswered questions, and the chilling possibility that the world we think we know is far more mysterious, and perhaps far more predatory, than we can comfortably admit. From a familiar trail to a suburban backyard, to the furthest reaches of an uninhabited island, nowhere, it seems, is entirely safe from the inexplicable. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Bonechill, for these accounts. If these stories resonated with you and you wish to support the channel, please do like, subscribe, and share. And remember to ring that notification bell. Until next time, try not to listen too closely to the silence. You never know what might be listening back. Stay safe and good night.